What's going on, guys? I'm Abby Martin, and this is Breaking the Set. So the NSA's leaky faucet just won't stop dripping. We already know that the U.S. government has its tentacles in the ears of world leaders in France, Germany, and Brazil. And just yesterday, we learned the extent of the NSA's global spying apparatus goes well beyond these three countries. Yes, apparently eavesdropping on the phone calls of longtime allies just isn't enough to quell Uncle Peeping Sam's voyeurism addiction. According to a 2006 classified memo released by The Guardian, the NSA has monitored the phone calls of 35 world leaders. And the best part is that the memo acknowledges that the spying has produced virtually no reportable intelligence. So, not only are we pissing off our most trusted allies, but we're doing it for no reason? Nah, I think we all know what's really going on here. This gives the U.S. the upper hand on virtually all diplomatic issues. What better way to win that chess game of global politics if you already know everyone's next move? Not to mention the benefits this information could provide American industry. In fact, NSA carries out industrial espionage on a regular basis. So if you're sick of being a citizen of a country that the global community is turning against, then join all of us tomorrow in D.C. in front of Union Station at 11:30 in the morning to tell the government to stop watching us at a historic anti-surveillance rally. And now, let's break the set. It turns out that not only the act of hacking can get you into legal trouble, but now just labeling yourself as a hacker can get you into hot water. Last week, a U.S. district court ruled that if you simply call yourself a hacker, you can apparently legally have all your equipment taken without warning. In this particular case, engineering laboratory Battelle Energy Alliance is suing ex-employee over claims that he stole software coding from the company. And the Idaho court decided that the employee's computer could be confiscated without notice simply because his website stated, "We like hacking things and don't want to stop." Yes, that's right. Despite Fourth Amendment language that protects individuals from unreasonable search and seizure, hackers are apparently not included. So why is the notion of a hacker synonymous with evil intent? And could the act of hacking be one of the only ways to protect online civil liberties? Anthropologist and professor Dr. Gabriella Coleman is an expert on hacker culture, and particularly the hacktivist group Anonymous. She joined Breaking the Set producer Manuel Rapalo earlier to talk about the group and the changing face of activism in an online world. He started by asking her what types of people comprise Anonymous.
I met everything from law students to wealthy engineers, to those who are very poor, to people who are immigrants in the countries that they live in, to kind of white middle-class Americans. So it's quite a diverse bunch, and I think the pseudo-anonymity of it, where you have a stable nickname, but you don't reveal who you are, helps to create conditions for remarkable diversity.
Yeah, it is amazing that they represent so many different ideas and so many different points of view within society. But you did mention something very interesting. Anonymous has become almost synonymous with the word hacker, which you mentioned, which still has a very negative connotation in mainstream culture. How would you define that word, hacker? And why do you think so many people have such an adverse reaction when they hear the term?
I tend to describe them as a class of technologists who, again, can be a system administrator, a programmer, security researcher, who tend to be committed to civil liberties like privacy and free speech, and who really have, they're kind of craftsmen who are also quite crafty, tricky, and cunning in their kind of orientation towards technology and politics. But obviously, one element of hacking is a transgressive tradition where you seek forbidden knowledge and you enter into computer servers illegally. And this historically in the kind of underground hacker community has been done for the sake of pleasure and seeking forbidden knowledge, not to destroy the servers where you enter. But because there is criminal activity, purely criminal activity in which individuals hack into a server to steal our data and credit cards, it has a kind of overwhelming negative image and doesn't take into account the both kind of subversive tradition of underground hacking and the subversive tradition of hacking which is completely legal, like open source software.
I want to ask you about those about the actual tactics, but I want to know something really interesting that Anonymous is planning on November 5th, which is the Million Mask March, which obviously the group is made up of diverse viewpoints and opinions. What type of message do you think Anonymous is trying to send by stepping out of the realm of online and onto the streets with this movement?
Well, their roots in activism were actually based in the streets. They started to protest the Church of Scientology on the street, and that's when that kind of transformation to activism from pure pranking happened. So this isn't the first time they organized street protests for Operation BART in San Francisco as well. But this is a very large-scale kind of protest that's being planned. I don't think their forte is always planning something well in advance and also an action that's not hinged to an actual event in the world. So I'm not so sure it's going to be anything all that big at some level. But what it does point to is the fact that many people taking the moniker do really care about issues of social and political justice.
Right, and so much of the focus has been on civil liberties and on social issues. In fact, earlier this year, you wrote an article where you said that it's hackers and coders and geeks that are the new guardians of civil liberties. Why do you believe this to be the case?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I really stand by that still. You know, what's so interesting about hackers and geeks is, again, they enter into the political arena in very diverse ways. And so they are doing everything from founding political parties like the pirate parties in Europe. They're building software tools like Tor, which help you anonymize yourself on the net, and they engage in dissent, like with Anonymous. The point is that they're getting involved in politics through all these different vectors. And most often, they're concerned with questions of free speech. They want to fight censorship, and they want to fight for privacy. And they're doing it, again, through different modalities, very different ones. So it's a very kind of culturally and politically rich domain of politics.
Right. I mean, they're involved in so much, and they're calling attention to stories that we would otherwise maybe not even hear about. We recently heard about them involved in the Steubenville case and the Maryville case now. Why do you think that we see Anonymous attack institutions that deal with unjust prison sentences and fail to, prosecute rapists? What does that say about society, that we have to rely on this group to fill the void of a broken justice system?
Well, I think you just, put your finger on it, is that there are many different elements to the justice system which are broken. It's not entirely broken, but there's enough broken parts where people aren't comfortable using that system alone. And so what Anonymous often does in their actions is expose the hypocrisy and the corruption inherent to these systems, and then shed light on the issues so that it kickstarts the justice system again, so that it might work, in a particular case, it might work well. But what it does in a grander sense is show the fact that there is kind of systemic problems when it comes to the justice system.
But when we see Anonymous going into places like PayPal or the Vatican or hacking the State Department, do you see this as legitimate activism, or should these type of actions be prosecuted?
So I do see it as legitimate activism, and I tend to see it as civil disobedience in most cases. And because it's civil disobedience, I do believe that the actors involved should be willing to face legal consequence, which might include some fines and even some limited jail times. But unfortunately, the system is so warped currently, where there's no space in the United States, especially for digital direct action and civil disobedience. So the punishment is so cruel and so excessive that it hasn't allowed a place for this. So yes, I believe there should be a consequence, but not the types of consequences that are currently being doled out against these activists.
Right, and so many people, especially in the civil liberties community, that worry that with the term anonymous being so loosely defined, that Congress could use the group maybe as a selling point to go after net neutrality, something that would be damaging, of course, for civil liberties. Do you think that this could be the case?
So I've written a little bit about this because on the one hand, yes, anonymous can be used as a kind of scary goblin to justify retrenchments of our civil liberties. On the other hand, the retrenchments and the kind of curtailments of our civil liberties are already here. And they're so extensive that if anonymous disappeared or never appeared, it would be no different. It would be no difference. And I don't think that they will successfully use them as an icon to make changes. If they want to make those changes, they will make those changes. And I think it's more important to have a kind of little factory that creates activists, which is precisely what happens with Anonymous, versus the fear that their negative image will be used to justify unfavorable laws, which already are on the books.
I wanted to ask your opinion as an anthropologist. What does it say about Anonymous? What does it say about the Anonymous movement? About, what does it indicate about the cultural evolution of activism and protests in this country? Well,
there's two facets that I think are really interesting. They're not quite connected, but it's fascinating that Anonymous is, on the one hand, so particular. It really arises out of geek and internet communities and sensibilities, which aren't universal, right? On the other hand, the mask and the face has become the global face, the symbolic token for dissent around the world. And I'm not surprised that it's a mask that kind of allows for this, because what it allows is for kind of extreme circulation, and different meanings can attach to that. And I think it's very important that Anonymous really shuns leaders and spokespeople, because since there's none of those, it could allow the symbol to circulate. And so that's been really fascinating to watch. And then again, I think, what they have really done in a more particular sense is put on this table this issue of civil disobedience in the digital realm. It has long existed as a tactic online with groups like the Electronic Disturbance Theater, but there's a populism and an openness to Anonymous, which has really burst this question out in the open. And I think we really need to listen to them and ask, well, do we really want a world where we can't have any civil disobedience online when we spend so much of our time online?
That was Dr. Gabriella Coleman, Wolf Chair in Scientific and Technological Literacy at McGill University. Thank you again for taking the time.
You're welcome.
After the break, he's already been convicted of genocide and war crimes, but a former Guatemalan dictator may get a chance at amnesty. Stay tuned. Earlier this year, an unprecedented trial led to the conviction of former Guatemalan dictator Efraín Ríos Montt. The 87-year-old was sentenced to 80 years in prison over his role in the genocide of over 1,700 indigenous Guatemalans during the bloodiest period of the country's 36-year civil war. And what seemed like an unbelievable win for the justice system was in fact too good to be true. You see, just this week, Guatemala's Constitutional Court issued a ruling allowing for the possibility of amnesty for Montt. A new trial is now scheduled for April of 2014. So to discuss this disturbing new development and dig a little deeper into the story, I'm joined by Jamila Aisha Brown, global strategist with Hugh International. Thank you so much for coming back on, Jamila.
Thank you for having me.
So, when I heard this, I was just kind of heartbroken, because here you have this unprecedented trial. He's convicted, sentenced to 80 years, and now we hear he might be granted amnesty. I mean, how do we go from that to this?
The sad thing is that as much as it's heartbreaking, it's not really a surprise. With myself having worked with indigenous communities of the genocide cases in another region, Rapalo, there were many regions, not just the Ixil, but they believed that it was the best case to move forward with the Ixil because they had the most evidence. In that case, I was fortunate enough to meet with one of the community members that I worked with very closely, who's the president of the Witnesses Association. And while they were heartbroken, the one thing they're saying is that you cannot take away that conviction. This is the first time any head of state in any country has been convicted for crimes of genocide in his own country. One of the things that we're also seeing is that the current president has a very strong connection to Rios Montt. President Otto Perez Molina was a field commander in the Ixil during that time. One of the things that happened after the verdict went down was that activists were calling for not only Rios Montt, but others that were implicated during that time of the genocide to be called to justice. So it was very likely that the president himself, the current president of Guatemala, could have been held responsible. So you're seeing that, members of government that were involved at the time, members who were military that were involved at the time, and also the business community as well. You know, one of the things that we don't talk about, kind of the dirty secret, is how involved corporations were in the genocide that happened to indigenous peoples in Guatemala, starting from Jacobo Arbenz and the threat he posed to the United Fruit Company.
It seems that corporations are involved a lot behind the scenes when you kind of uncensor the history of these countries. Jamila, you know, you mentioned the indigenous community are obviously pushing forward. We have this verdict, and I just can't imagine what they're feeling after decades of struggle, after seeing this man walk free and then finally have this indictment and then say, wait, we need to put it on hold. Talk about what his crimes were for people who might not know the story.
It was completely devastating. In the Ixil specifically, they used a policy called scorched earth, which many people will know from other areas around the world. About 70 to 90% of the Ixil community was burned during that time, in addition to rampant massacres, rape, the murder of children. In other communities, one thing that you would see is called the destruction of the seed, where they would kill not only the men in the community, but all of the boys as well, so that they wouldn't be able to continue to have heirs that were indigenous.
Horrific. And you know, you went to Guatemala, you worked closely with this indigenous activists. What was your experience like hearing this firsthand from them?
You know, just to be a very tiny part of this movement is really just shaped my entire activism in the way that I view the world. The beauty of this movement is that it is a grassroots and indigenous movement. This really did come from the people. This was more than 13 years in the making to bring him to trial. And the amount of resilience they have is just something that continues to blow me away. One of the questions that they would ask indigenous witnesses who testified was, how does your heart feel? And many of them would say that my heart is glad because I'm finally getting the chance to tell my story. And even amongst all of the heartbreak, that's the one thing that they're holding on to. You know, they say that you cannot take it away. And no matter what happens, April 2014, no matter what happened in May when the decision was reversed, you cannot take that away.
It's symbolic as hell. I mean, these people's voices were heard. It's on record. We know the crimes that were done. And I also saw that a call was actually to put the U.S. government on trial as well for this Rios Montt conviction. Why? What?
The United States is horribly complicit in the genocide in Guatemala. Ronald Reagan called Rios Montt a man of great personal integrity. They had a very close relationship. Ronald Reagan, as we all know, had a very hard line against Marxist rebels, which what the Ixil people were denounced as being part of the reasoning why they justified the genocide that occurred in the 1980s. So you have that. You have record of the United States really covertly giving weapons, helicopters to Guatemala during that time period, which actually is illegal in U.S. law with the Leahy law and other laws that are on the books. But we've definitely been involved in the beginning. Again, I'd reference the 1954 assassination of President Jacobo Arbenz, who was democratically elected, and that assassination was carried out by the CIA.
And we also know that Rios Montt was trained at the School of Americas. I mean, we have the School for Genocidal Dictators. It seems like they keep being spawned out of the school. Do you think that Reagan's support for Montt and his training at the SOA kind of helped facilitate these crimes against humanity and help cover them up?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the unfortunate legacy of the School of the Americas. As you said, it's called the School of the Dictators, and that's for a reason. Not just in Guatemala, but all throughout Latin America. People that have received training at this school went on to become brutal dictators in their own countries, and Efraín Rios Montt is sadly just one example.
And you know, I can't help but think after this was kind of delayed and put on hold, you know, considering the outcome of this trial so far, what chance do you think they'll be ever holding politicians accountable that are white, affluent politicians from America, Britain, for their war crimes?
Well, I think it's extremely difficult. The one thing that I actually do feel encouraged about because of this Guatemala case is that hopefully countries in the global south will be able to start their own movements as opposed to depending on the Inter-American Court for this hemisphere, as opposed to depending on the ICC at The Hague in the United Nations. I think that that's really what we're looking forward to. In terms of holding Western officials accountable, it is a completely different battle.
Jamila, we're almost out of time, but is there a website that people can go to help facilitate support or just provide support for these people?
Absolutely. The organization that I worked with as a human rights accompanier is called Network in Solidarity with the People of Guatemala, or NISGUA. That's NISGUA.org.
Thank you so much. We'll put that website on the description of this video. Thank you so much for talking on this issue, providing some insight. Jamila, Aisha Brown, Global Strategist, Hugh Global. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Remember when leaving work actually meant leaving work? You know, going home in peace without a cell phone alert going off every 5 minutes. Now, work never really leaves you, considering how your phone's also your computer. Don't get me wrong, having the world's knowledge in your pocket is a revolutionary tool. But if we've learned anything from the NSA revelations, it's that integrating ourselves with the digital world has a serious downside. We already know that all of our personal data is cataloged and rearranged into digital versions of ourselves, and everything that's collected is up for grabs. But with the corporate collusion with government, you can bet that accessing this information isn't just about power, it's about economic advantage. See, personalized advertising isn't just tied to our behavior online. It's also connected to everything we do in the real world. You may not give it much thought, but that plastic card in your pocket is really a holy grail of information for corporate advertising. Believe it or not, when you swipe your credit card at a gas station, you're that much more likely to be targeted online by a car company or maybe by a diet pill ad after you visit McDonald's one night. See, everything is connected now, whether it's in the digital world or the real world. And while it's certainly convenient for advertisers to look at people as mindless corporate trends, this cultural shift is causing us to lose sight of one another as human beings. At the heart of this disconnect is our ever-growing dependence on technology, which in turn fuels the exploitation of individuality. See, they've mastered how to take advantage of our uniqueness and make us feel that by purchasing these products, we are expressing our originality, all the while still being treated as consumer sheep. This technologic dependence and manipulative advertising is why we're still online at the dinner table, in transit to work, and even asleep with our smartphones at an arm's length. Just to survive in today's workforce, being glued to your phone is par for the course. But being a diligent worker bee doesn't guarantee you job security. Case in point is that during this global recession, productivity has actually increased. We've officially become a world of workaholics, and we're physically suffering as a result. Countless studies have confirmed the correlation between workaholism and sleep disorders, heart disease, nervous system problems, and mental illness, among many others. And we're not just tethered to our jobs, but to a cycle of consumption, an act that society equates to happiness. We're told that the more we have, the happier we'll be. But in reality, the more we buy, the more we feel we need. We gotta work for that dollar. We gotta work, work, work. Well, guess what? I've never heard anyone's last words being, hey, I wish I'd worked more. And unless you're a pharaoh, I doubt any of those material possessions will be buried with you in your tomb. Look, anyone who's traveled the world sees that those who have little more than the basic staples can often be happier than those with the greatest amount of wealth. Now, I'm not suggesting that all of you go out and quit your job. After all, most of us need to work to survive. And hard work often leads to great rewards. I'm also not trying to preach to you. I'm as guilty as the next person of constantly checking Twitter, being wrapped up in the 24-hour news cycle, and spending way, way too much time on the internet. But I also understand this dilemma. And I know how hard it is to achieve conscious simplicity, living true to the mantra that wanting less actually means having more. Remember, experiences are more valuable than commodities. So I implore you this weekend, connect with another human being and go out into nature. Because at the end of the day, that's what's real and that's what matters.